Welcome to Blockchain Recorded, the podcast for the tech curious, where we talk about anything and everything related to the exponentially evolving crypto, blockchain, and Web 3.0 space. Our mission is simple: to share knowledge, facilitate discourse, and help evolve education in blockchain fundamentals, decentralization solutions, and relevant use cases for today's digital economy. We at Blockchain Recorded are not registered investment advisors and do not deal with financial or trading token elements, nor offer any licensed financial services. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only, while the opinions of all parties involved are their own. I'm your host, Nina Tserar, and now let's talk blockchain. Before I introduce our guest today, I'd like to remind our listeners to follow us on Twitter, where we pre-stream each episode on Twitter Spaces the day before publishing on all major podcast platforms. For the platform list, visit our website, blockchainrecorded.com. Today's guest is Roy Hui. Roy is the founder of LightLink, a Layer 2 blockchain built for the Metaverse, NFT, and gaming applications. Roy is an engineer and entrepreneur, having founded several other ventures, such as Pellar, MyMedia, and MMGN.com, among other initiatives, which I will let Roy dive into himself. Roy, welcome to Blockchain Recorded.
Thank you for having me, Nina.
I hope I got your bio introduction right. Am I correct in understanding that LightLink and Pellar are your current ventures?
That is right. We started our blockchain venture in 2017, and we've been in the Web3 crypto blockchain world for the past 6 years, and it's been a hell of a ride.
I'm sure it has. Just from my understanding, what is Pellar?
Right.
Because today we're going to predominantly talk about LightLink, but what exactly is Pellar?
Pellar is a Web3 builder. So we build blockchain solutions, and it all started in 2017 when friends of ours asked us if we can build blockchain technology for them. And we started building infrastructure blockchain technology and saw a lot of challenges that businesses had. And that's one of the reasons why we built LightLink.
So LightLink came subsequently.
Correct.
I know you have a computer science background, but what exactly brought you to the world of Web3 and founding a Layer 2?
It's a long story.
Feel free. We have time.
Sure. It's also great that you brought up the computer science background, because as an engineer, you don't really choose the computer science background because it's a cool thing to do. It's part of your life, right? Like when you are a kid, you're inquisitive, you like to tinker with things and take apart alarm clocks and have an engineering mind. And those are the candidates that we love to have as engineers on our team, to have a natural inquisitive mind. And that path typically in this day and age will lead you to a computer engineering background. And eventually, when you are very technical and inquisitive, you will choose computer science as a thing to study in the university. And when you are inquisitive, when you're curious, when you love technology, you like to explore the frontiers of technology. And the flavor of the month in this world, of course, is artificial intelligence, right? So if you are in computer science or love technology, you'll probably be playing with language models or machine learning or that type of technology. And as I was in the industry, in the technology industry, back early 2000, blockchain, crypto is one of those technologies that comes around, and there are people talking about this new innovation, this new technology. And quite early in my career, 2012, was when I discovered Bitcoin. And there were a lot of people talking about Bitcoin, and I started looking at the technology, and it's super, super fascinating. And, people speculate on its price and talk about how it will become a currency and change the world. But I really looked at the technology, how information can be structured in a way that it is immutable. And I saw nothing like that in the world, right? In terms of databases are like glorified Excel spreadsheets where you can go to a cell and modify a certain record. But this technology based on cryptography anchors truth from the inception of that piece of data and how it evolved and into a series of changes. And that immutability, that permanence was amazing. And it all stems from a cryptography nature. And that I thought, wow, it's going to change the world. And we took a gamble early 2017. And in a way, looking back 6 years, it has changed the world. When I talk to other people about blockchain, nobody had an idea of what I was talking about back then. And now, like when I go to my kids' primary school, parents' drinks, and everybody wanted to talk about blockchain.
So this was, would you say, so more today? Well, 6 years can be not a long time if you're slightly older, but in the crypto world, it's like decades, because I'm assuming that you've gone through ups and downs from the inception of LightLink and Pellar. But yeah, certainly the conversation has changed. I'm personally not a computer engineer myself, but I come from a finance background, but I really like what you said, it anchors truth. I hope I can borrow that. I may actually borrow that.
Certainly.
So, and then what brought you then to founding an L2?
Yeah. Again, a very interesting question. So blockchain fundamentally is in my mind, a revolutionary technology, and technology goes through iterations and improvements and incremental adjustments along the way. One of the foundational technology we built at Pellar was an enterprise blockchain. It was designed to be completely opposite to Ethereum, because at the time, Ethereum is a large internet computer in my mind, and it had a lot of inefficiencies back then in terms of its speed, its capacity, its costs, and largely today as well. But I kind of see the brilliance in a lot of the technology of Elektrik has championed, right? So we wanted to build something that was opposite to Ethereum, to be able to move very fast, operate very efficiently, but at the same time, it suffered a lot of things that Ethereum was very good at in terms of security, decentralization, and the native transparency and interoperability large public blockchains had. So we built this private blockchain as a key IP, and we licensed to many organizations around the world, including large investment banks, financial institutions, enterprise supply chain customers, and so on and so forth. And these customers were really good at what they were doing, but they were missing the larger evolution of a financial world, the digital financial world. So they couldn't tap into the liquidity of USDT or call another composable smart contract. And we kept on innovating that private enterprise blockchain world to look at how can we capitalize on that world, on the DeFi world and things like that. And at the same time, we were doing a variety of different layer 1 projects, deploying NFT projects or DeFi projects onto Ethereum and Polygon and Binance, and saw the inefficiencies in that environment in terms of it's very costly, it's fairly slow, but it was really brilliant at what it was doing. And when the concepts of layer 2s came around, it was somewhere in the middle. And that's what we went, wow, we can have the best of both worlds. I mean, it's never really the best of both worlds, but it was something in the middle. And we reconfigured our private enterprise blockchain into a public configuration and built it on top of one of the largest economies in the world, and that's Ethereum, and that's the layer 2 foundation. But it was really to address the requirements and problems that we saw around the industry. We had Metaverse projects that were looking at utilizing the private blockchain we had, and it could tap into so much of the existing economy. And that's where layer 2 really shine, because it sat on top of a very, very large economy. And by having EVM compatibility, by having the same level of encryption, it essentially means we can connect to existing larger ecosystems much easier than a private enterprise configuration. So that's sort of where we came from.
Just curious, is your team based in Australia, or is it spread differently around the world, or geographically, or is it more localized?
Yeah, we've been working remote for a very long time now. And that configuration in terms of finding the best people around the world has been something that we've done over a very long time. I've done, over decades, right? So we try not to have geography as a restriction for growth. So we try to find the best people around the world. One of our lead engineers is based in Ireland. One of our embedded engineers is based in Brazil. We have, talent from Vietnam. And of course, we have, brilliant engineers here in Australia too.
Oh, it's wonderful to hear. So you're not, remote is not a new thing for you. It's more of a way of life then.
Yeah, exactly. 24/7.
24/7. Well, yeah, because of the time differences, it gets tricky. So, well, before we dive into LightLink, I would just like to set the stage for the L2 concept and conversation. If you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to hear from your point of view and to understand more about your thought process around L2s. So what kinds of L2s exist and what kind of problems do they solve? This is just more of a general question.
Yeah, great question. I think layer 2s are built on top of layer 1s, and the core concept is to scale layer 1s. And I think if we look at Vitalik's, the founder of Ethereum's thesis, is we would eventually move into a multi-chain environment where Ethereum as a foundation will maintain the most secure, the most decentralized infrastructure, and will eventually be a settlement layer, where execution layer, in terms of where most of the transactions happen, will happen on the layer 2 environment. So let's unpack that a bit. So right now, if I have USDT on Ethereum, Ethereum MainNet, when I send you USDT, that transaction is fairly costly. Maybe it's 50 cents or $1, depending on gas price and Ethereum price. But when we think of actual fiat pricing, it is a fairly costly exercise to carry out that transaction. And transaction speed, it's okay, but it's not near instant from a real-time perspective. So there are a lot of challenges executing large volume of transactions at a lower cost on the Ethereum mainnet. But at the same time, Ethereum is where, at least from my Web3 lens, where all the crypto natives probably trust the most, right? It has the biggest decentralization. It has the most innovation. The largest population of developers are building on top of Ethereum. So in its current state, it's probably one of the largest economies from a digital financial DeFi world perspective. But due to all the limitations I was talking about earlier, layer 2s try to solve those issues by saying, can we process a lot of these transactions outside of layer 1 and then anchor our truth, anchoring our transactions back onto layer 1. So it attempts to solve these problems by saying, can we add more scalability? Can we add more performance? Can we reduce the transaction processing time? Can we reduce the cost? And can we use Ethereum as a way to, can we use its decentralization, can we use security, but scale transactions in a different capacity? And that's the general concepts of layer 2. And there are many different methods of doing that. And broadly speaking, I think optimistic rollups and ZK-based type of layer 2s are the most common implementation today.
So given that picture, where does LightLink fit into this picture as an L2, and how does it stand out from the crowd of EVM blockchains?
Yeah, firstly, I think before addressing the difference, it's probably important also to address the similarities, right? Because similarities reduces the barrier to entry. We've decided Ether, the currency on Ethereum, being the native token for transactions. And that means you don't need to grasp a separate concept or buy a native token differently from a separate exchange. I don't need to buy BNB or Matic using Polygon and BNB as an example to execute smart contracts and deploy smart contracts on LightLink. So by using the same native token allows us to onboard more developers, more projects quicker, because there's no external concepts to understand. And at the same time, we use Solidity, we're EVM compatible. So from a development perspective, you can just copy and paste your existing smart contracts or point your MetaMask to LightLink with a click of a button, and your smart contracts will run, your existing infrastructure will run. So having that similarity is really important, even though it's something that people overlook, right? But at the same time, because it's a layer 2, we can operate at substantially higher frequency and conduct more transactions, and therefore transactions on layer 2 are near instant. They're super low cost, and many people can use LightLink at the same time. So we can process up to 429 million transactions every day. So similarities first. In terms of differences, this is where I think LightLink it's a little bit interesting, because those are the fundamental things that I believe a layer 2 should contain, where we don't really see a lot of those implementations. So one of the key differentiation is we have something I call the enterprise mode. So when of course, it's a permissionless public chain. Anybody can deploy a smart contract on top of LightLink using Ether. But in my mind, one of the biggest complexities working with a blockchain, working with a new blockchain network, is the need of a native token. Mm-hmm. And when a smart contract is configured to be an enterprise mode, the user who is interacting with that smart contract no longer needs a native token. So to simplify what I just said, essentially it's a gasless mode. So for example, if you have USDT, you just send USDT and the recipient will receive USDT without the need of a native token. And I think it's really, really important, right? Because the native token concept doesn't exist in the real world. So for example, if I go to a cafe and want to buy a cup of coffee, I would, tap my phone or credit card and spend USD, AUD, or Euro, whatever the currency is, and the merchant will receive the same currency. There isn't a need for me to use a different currency for that transaction to happen. If I'm using MasterCard as an example, I don't need MasterCard coins for that USD transaction to happen. So that's largely true in the wider crypto world, and those concepts are very difficult to map to the real world. And if we need massive, massive adoption for this new technology, we need to figure out how to change the economics a bit, or change the tokenomics a bit, for it to be a more natural fitting for the Web 2 world.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you already mentioning the gasless mode. I will definitely pick your brain on that. But before we move on to, in terms of the transaction costs, I'm just curious, what makes LightLink a true Ethereum L2? Just going back to, you're talking about private and public, do you source security from the Ethereum L1? And if so, to what extent?
Yeah, great question. There are different configurations of layer 2 environments, right? When you look at Arbitrum as an example, there's Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum Nova.
Right.
So many would say Arbitrum Nova has separate configuration, has different configuration, and does it make a true L2? But largely, people recognize Arbitrum Nova as a layer 2. So we are, from a configuration perspective, we are more close to the Arbitrum Nova family school of layer 2, where we separate out data availability and we place our transactions on a separate data availability layer and post our proofs onto layer 1. Mm-hmm. And we consciously made that decision so we can run things at a faster speed and maintain a constant cost in writing transactions to layer 1. But I think a layer 2 writing your proofs onto layer 1 makes us borrowing the security and decentralization of Ethereum and giving us that security Ethereum is able to offer.
I ask my guests this question frequently, and there's different answers. People approach it differently in terms of the Vitalik's blockchain trilemma. How do you view Vitalik's trilemma today? Do you think it's relevant?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And just curious, how did you approach the interplay between, obviously, we're talking about decentralization, security, and scalability properties on LightLink? Yeah,
it's a great question. I don't think layer 2 addresses all of those things. If it did, it would be a layer 1, right? And
right,
the most optimal configuration of layer 1 might be Ethereum. And if we suffer decentralization, it might be, a BNB chain as an example, right? So layer 2 addresses a different problem. It's just purely scaling. And we inherit and borrow the security decentralization from Ethereum. And therefore, we can work on one of the areas, and that's scalability.
Yeah, I mean, the main goal of a layer 2 is to increase transaction throughput, which, according to the stats that I checked with LightLink, they're actually pretty amazing. Higher transactions per second in terms of the time, block time, etc., but without sacrificing decentralization or security. Just going in terms of, what is your transaction finality in terms of LightLink?
500 milliseconds at the moment.
500 milliseconds, which is very fast.
Correct.
So how are you achieving this?
By sacrificing decentralization, right? So a lot of layer 2s are fairly centralized. So Optimism and Arbitrum, as example, are fairly centralized layer 2s. There is a roadmap to further decentralization in the future, but because it's centralized, we have control of computation power, network speed, various configurations of algorithms, and we can process transactions at a substantially higher frequency, and we rely on layer 1 to provide that security and decentralization for the layer 2.
Fair enough. So back to the gasless mode. Mm-hmm. I listened to you in an AMA where you talked about the gasless mode, and obviously seems to be your key distinction from other layer 2s. In other words, you aim to shift the gas fee to the contract deployer system versus the actual users of the system.
Correct.
So having gasless transactions is quite a big deal. So going back to previously what you alluded to, can you first explain the concept? And second, talk about your approach in achieving this. Would this essentially be a subscription model?
Correct.
Shifting to the contract deployer system? Okay,
yeah.
So
the main target for enterprise mode are enterprise customers, mm-hmm. where I've spoken to a lot of CTOs in larger organizations over the years, and one of the constant worry that they have is, can my transactions be completed? So that uncertainty, mm-hmm. how much are my transactions going to cost? How many people can it service? And what does my infrastructure cost? Because they view, these computation networks as infrastructure technology. How much does my infrastructure cost going to change over the next 12 months, right? So as a CTO for a large bank or a large telco, those are, very normal questions for if you're choosing a cloud service provider. So to say it's going to be $5,000 for the next 12 months is a very difficult thing to say for a public blockchain, because that economics isn't in your control, right? It's market driven, and therefore when supply and demand drive the token price as well as gas price to different directions, you as a CTO have no control of your infrastructure cost. And one of the ways to address that is firstly to increase capacity, and by operating a layer 2 in the configurations that we have employed allows you to have a lot of capacity. And by having more capacity, you are able to process more transaction than hopefully there is demand for. And therefore, you can allocate some of that supply to enterprise customers with a level of certainty. So if we take, say, 400 million of transactions that we have the capacity to produce every day, we can say maybe half of them are allocated to enterprise usage. And the remuneration for that those capacity can be a monthly subscription in fiat. And therefore, the enterprise customers can solve those issues, can be rest assured the transactions are going to complete, and we are going to have the capacity of, say, 10,000 transactions a day or 100,000 transactions a day. Mm-hmm. And we as an organization, the enterprise customer, can pay $10,000 a month in fiat and having that computation capability.
Okay. Your website states that in terms of predictable pricing that you have, it costs a cent, right, as a transaction cost. Am I correct?
From a public transaction perspective.
From a public,
yeah,
yes.
Correct.
So in terms of the public, right, in terms of the public side, what is your approach to calculating the transaction cost?
Yeah. The method of calculating transaction costs are very similar to other EVM-based blockchains. You essentially use the price of Ether and times by what the gas price is, times by the number of gas consumed. And MetaMask does that automatically for you, where we are essentially at the moment setting the gas price manually to be a fixed number, because there's a lot of capacity to be able to produce computation power, and that allows us to set a average transaction price to be a fairly low value.
Okay. And how are you handling bridging to LightLink?
Great question. I think bridging as an infrastructure technology is available to, it's a public knowledge, right? So many projects can fork existing bridges, or many existing bridge providers can deploy their infrastructure on LightLink, on Ethereum, on other networks. It's a permissionless network. Anybody can build on top. So hopefully, if we have the reason for projects to be building bridges, people will build bridges, right? So because it's open. From a LightLink perspective, we are providing an official bridge. So that official bridge is built by our team. It's a concept we have done several times in the past, and we've done several security audits by external third parties to ensure bridges constructed nicely, reasonably, and securely.
Okay, perfect answer. I think I heard it's dinner time around where you are, right? So there's some commotion in the back. Is LightLink a vanilla EVM? Does it have the same address as Ethereum, for example?
Yes, it does. Because we operate the same type of encryption, you're able to reuse your existing Ethereum address on the network. So if you have MetaMask, for example, you can, with a click of a button, add LightLink to your MetaMask network and transact just using your existing infrastructure. So in that sense, it is. We also use the Geth compiler in Ethereum client itself. So we do that to maintain the perfect compatibility with Solidity, with the full EVM understanding out there in the world.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, our audience is pretty mixed, so sometimes it's nice to just address the different components of what goes on in a layer 2, and also from the address aspect. Let's talk about the consensus mechanism. How does LightLink's consensus work? Is it different from any other layer 2, etc.? Just wanted to get your thoughts.
There are a lot of similarities between us and other popular layer 2s like Arbitrum and Optimism. At the moment, it's a whitelisted system. So for sequencers or validators to participate in the network, it has to be within a whitelist for now. And we do have a path to encourage other or incentivize other participants into the network to increase further decentralization and processing capacity.
So with respect to validators, can I ask how many you have?
At the moment, it's 5, I think.
Okay. And who can validate and run a validator node? Is this just an average Joe, or would you need to be an experienced developer with, let's say, access to more sizable resources?
Yeah, at the moment, it is all conducted internally by our team.
Okay.
And in the future, we would encourage our supporters, network supporters to participate. And there is a minimum computation power required to become a validator. And as long as you are able to meet that computation requirement, you can participate in the network.
And just curious, so what is LightLink's validator incentive?
Yeah, from incentivizing validator and network participation, I think the obvious answer to that is in the future we'll be launching a token, and the token should represent the value of the network. And therefore, if you choose to help the network to grow, achieve further decentralization and add value to the network, then you are incentivized with more share of the network. it's something that we are working with our advisors on as well, because having the right tokenomics is critical to have the right incentivization.
Mm-hmm. So I read that LightLink was purposefully built for, you actually define it as Metaverse, NFT, and gaming applications, which I also gather is due to your affinity to gaming. Obviously, I checked out your LinkedIn page and saw that you founded mmgn.com. I'm not familiar with mmgn, but I imagine it's a gaming community. So Metaverse is quite a wide concept. What exactly do you mean by that, and how are you planning to capture with the so-called Metaverse?
Yeah, interesting question.
Feel free to answer however you interpret it.
Sure. One of our largest investors is the Translocere Group based in Thailand.
Oh, I see.
They are affiliated with large media companies and telcos and other larger corporate initiatives. And one of the key corporate strategies to how can we build more of a digital presence, more of a metaverse capability within Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. And Translocere is intending to do more things in this world, right? But when you look at metaverse as an economy, as a new digital world, in my mind, assets in that world are NFTs, and financial transactions in that world is crypto. Right, so you have fungible and you have non-fungible. You have two sides of that equation. Right. And if we envision that future world, no matter what form does it taking, right? Whether if it's desktop or mobile, AR, VR, or whatever, right? So if that future digital world needs an infrastructure for these assets, for these digital assets, digital payments to be conducted in, a blockchain will be a reasonable foundation for those transactions because it's natively built for those transactions. It's the most secure. It has existing standards defining payments in terms of tokens or assets in terms of NFTs, and they're fairly widely understood from a interoperability from a crypto native's perspective. So we built LightLink for that purpose in mind, to provide a digital infrastructure for the future. Now, gaming is really interesting too, because when I talk to game developers, they have this mentality of a single chain ecosystem, right? So when they say, hey, let's build a Web3 game, let's put stuff on chain, right? And the obvious thinking is, can we put it on Binance? Can we put it on Polygon? Can we put these transactions on Ethereum? But it makes sense for some transactions to be on Polygon. So for example, if you have USDT as a reward, as an example, you play some games, you get some rewards. And if those rewards have value, you want those transactions to be on a chain with the most widely supported, the most liquidity, right? So you want your USDT on Ethereum or on Polygon as an example, right? So you play this game, you get your USDT on these chains. So it makes sense for you to issue rewards on those chains. But at the same time, if you want a valuable PFP that you can tap into the existing NFT marketplaces, you also want it to be on those chains. But there's actually more transactions than those two that I just mentioned, the rewards and the PFPs and the subscriptions. There are records that are very important to gamers too. So for example, I am a level 27 warrior and I have accumulated 50,000 points by doing all these quests, right? So those are also valuable records, but those records might not be valuable for the wider world, they're valuable for me. So I implore game developers to explore a two-chain strategy, right? So you have value on one side and you have records on the other side. For the very valuable transactions, maybe it's, at least today, to utilize a network that has the highest value, the highest interoperability, the largest economy, and that might be Binance or Polygon, Ethereum. For the transactions which are records, it doesn't make sense to place all of those records onto a layer one, right? So you need to look at what does it look like if you place those transactions on a layer two. because it's faster, it's easier, it's cheaper for you to write those records on a layer 2. And that's another reason why we built LightLink. Now, all the other layer 2s out there have something which I call the linear pricing model. So, for example, if I pay 1 cent for a transaction and I do this 100 times, I pay $1. It's a linear scaling solution. The more it's a multiple of how many times you do this. But when you conduct a transactions for millions of users, for even hundreds and thousands of users, that becomes very cost prohibitive from a game developer perspective, right? Like it's fairly easy to imagine your game have 50,000 players, and if they use the game 10 times a day, that's 500,000 records, right? And the question is, where do you place that? If you place that onto a layer 2 that costs 1 cent per transaction, which is a fairly cheap cost, it's going to run you $5,000 a day. And that becomes a very costly exercise for a game developer to bear, because 50,000 users, DAUs, writing 10 transactions a day, it's not a very big exercise. So that's why we introduced the non-linear pricing model. You can pay a monthly fee, and there's a capacity, just like a SaaS product, and you can write transactions up to that capacity. And it becomes a lot more affordable for developers to entertain.
Wow, this was actually super interesting. Are you a gamer, by the way? Because you have a lot of gaming in your background.
Yeah, I love to play games, but I just don't have the time.
You don't have the time. I figured that would be the answer, where to find the time. But because obviously you would have to understand all these metrics, right? All this interplay that you're talking about. It makes so much sense. So on a daily basis, because you did build LightLink for this purpose. I mean, you must have these conversations. Do you have these conversations on a daily basis in terms of these different metrics that you were just talking about?
Yeah.
And what makes sense?
Yeah. One of the most important things to build technology is to build with a purpose in mind to solve a problem, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, building something that nobody needs, I think that's, doesn't make sense,
obviously.
Right? So
you want adoption, of course.
Exactly. So when we talk to game developers, when we talk to customers, when we talk to large enterprise projects, it's important to understand what their pains are, and if they experiment with Web3, what's holding them back, and how we can iterate and improve to meet their needs, right? And LightLink is an iteration on top of other people who have built this technology in the past.
Of course. So yeah, I'm just curious, because of course you have to apply this to make it useful, and not just to build something and have it sit there. Just curious, this is a completely sort of a general question, not a technical question. What's a day in the life of Roy Hui? I mean, I imagine no day is the same, but LightLink has been around for a while. It's on MainNet, etc. Could you generalize a day or maybe a week? Like, what is a typical day, or what does a typical week look like for you now?
Yeah, good question. Like you said, every day is different, every week's different. Last week was at Token 2049, and that was really, really exciting. One of the largest events in the region. And I've met and bumped into people that we've done business with, we've worked with for a very long time, but never met in person. So that was really cool.
That's always nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if it's a remote, it can get, you need to put a face to the virtual face.
Yeah, exactly. And there's something that can't be conveyed digitally, even with the camera on, right? So that physical presence is really interesting.
Absolutely.
So firstly, we have numerous projects, numerous interests that's happening in parallel. So I talk to our engineers, our project groups to understand where we are and help them with prioritization, right? Because I have a good understanding from a broad picture, what's important, what's coming down the pipeline, how we can support our customers. So helping our existing team with prioritization is a key element that I do every day. To talk with various members of the team to understand where their problems are, how can we solve them, get an understanding of what they're working on, and help them to be successful. So we have great team members who are responsible for their individual categories, whether if it's ecosystem or foundation or marketing or finance or business development, and helping them along the way, right? Also, I'm one of the largest endorsers of the protocol, right? So I try to talk to customers, potential customers, to understand how we can add value, right? It's an exchange of values, in my opinion. It's not really about saying we're the best and you have to use us. It's about understanding what their pains are and how we can configure our technology and offer value to solve their problem. And that takes a substantial amount of my time every day as well.
No, I'm sure. I mean, it's the value conversation is always key for the long term. Everybody can pitch that their layer 2 is the best, but ultimately it's for what use and for what purpose and for optimal value for both sides. So,
correct.
How big is your team?
About 30 different people participating from a variety of different capacity at the moment.
Yeah, right. No, that's pretty fair. A lot of the layer 2s or actually even layer 1s that we speak with, the number varies. And then, of course, it's the number of developers. That's
exactly.
That's the key component. Just curious, how many devs do you have?
We are majority engineers.
I see.
Yeah. It's also interesting because we are working on a protocol, but there are many teams who are building on top of our infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. We're providing them with a platform, with a foundation to build innovation, to help them to find and unlock things that they haven't done before in other protocols as well.
Mm-hmm. So we touched upon the metaverse and the gaming aspect. Are you looking to attract any other applications?
Those are important categories. So we're currently working on two separate streams. One is what existing Web2 real-world applications can we port over to Web3, and that I believe solves the how can we introduce this technology to the wider world, because crypto native users are still very small in comparison to billions of people around the world. Mm-hmm. And we try to tackle this problem by, can we introduce public transportation? Can we introduce payments to the larger world and onboard millions of users? So that's one area of focus, talking to, public transportation, CBDC pilots, large existing Web2 projects with a lot of customers, and look at how we can add Web3 to add value, right? And the other arm of the business is looking at how can we build out a more complete Web3 ecosystem. And whether if that's DeFi protocols or existing NFT infrastructure or Web3 components. And so I call this sort of the two areas where I'm focusing substantially on the enterprise side, where other members of our BD team are focusing on the Web3 side. And a dream of mine is the two converges in a year and a half or 2 years from now, where we have millions of users who are capturing value, who are seeing this protocol, this technology would be a better form of technology for them in the things that they do. And Web3 capabilities unlock new things for those users. And that's a really cool thing for us to hope to see in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think on every single episode that we have, and when I talk to founders, almost everybody says we're still early. There's a lot of building going on, even no matter what state of the market we are in. But of course, adoption is key. So bridging Web 2, or even maybe in some areas of the world, they're in Web 2, Web 2.5. I would imagine that's why what I was asking about the metaverse. I feel like that Southeast Asia or Asia in general is much more, maybe advanced is not the right word, but just much more prominent, much more present in the metaverse. And it's a much more daily way of life versus we're like here in Europe where we're based. But in the end, bridging from Web 2 to Web 3 and doing this dance, I feel like that's where we're in, right? And it's super interesting to hear everybody's different take in terms of their founding their projects. Just curious, What is this? So LightLink is not a new blockchain. What is the state of the deployed applications on MainNet now? If you can just maybe give us a picture of how different things stand.
Yeah, it's we've been in MainNet for a few months now, and it's still a relatively young ecosystem, a young economy, right? We focus predominantly on the enterprise applications first to look at where we can scale using a dual chain architecture, as I was talking about previously, for existing games, or to reduce transaction costs on layer ones, to add more transactions, allowing these games to scale. Those are the past focus areas. And we are working closely with another group to deploy the first AMM DEX on top of LightLink, and that project is called Elektrik. And that's really interesting because they started with a Uniswap fork, right? In terms of there's a lot of features within a existing DEX, but by exploring the gasless features, the trading algorithm can unlock new trading models, because AMMs are really efficient from a gas processing perspective. It only does trading between two currencies fairly effectively using that algorithm. But if we remove gas difficulties from a user perspective, the project can deploy other types of trading, like limit orders or iceberg orders, which are very different from AMM type of orders, and that gives a better user experience. That gives a more efficient market. So by simply, if we can call gasless simple, you can almost unlock new innovations for users, for developers to explore, for users to have a better UX, for them to have more efficient trading, and for value to be created in both sides. So that's on the AMM front. And on different infrastructure, we have different partnerships. So NFT, in exchanges and DeFi, we have many different conversations in parallel. But relatively, we're still a fairly young ecosystem. But from a testnet perspective, we've had over, I think, 18,000 smart contracts deployed, and that's quite astounding for the number of months we've been. Yeah, it's a pretty high number. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like your roadmap is definitely packed with respect to what you just said. What's in store for year-end 2023? Can you let us in on your immediate roadmap? And then what's in store for 2024?
Ooh.
Or the list is too long to talk about?
Yeah, there are so many things we're working on, right? Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we can announce some of the deals that we've been working on for the past few months. And those are large Web2 projects that we're adding Web3 innovation to, right? And those are very well-known household media brands. And I think it will be really exciting. Because of these characteristics, we're able to add, for LightLink, we're able to add to that picture. And those are where we're focusing at least a lot of our attention on, to go, how can we solve the user problem first? Let's bring a couple of million users onto the network and get them to interact with a limited capacity for now. Maybe it's just earning points or unlocking digital collectibles or avatars for now. But hopefully we can introduce more Web3 innovation. So for example, the ability to borrow, the ability to earn, utilizing that user base, but more Web3 infrastructure. So that's what I'm super, super excited about. And hopefully we can see more of that convergence between the two enterprise user base, Web2 user base, and Web3 ecosystem towards the end of next year.
Well, perfect. Sounds super exciting, actually. I'm just curious because you have a lot of things on your plate. Looking back from where you are now with LightLink and the inception, what would you say were some of your biggest challenges that you faced? Or do you even remember? Or you blocked them out?
Every day, right?
Every day. Surely. I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's not an easy road.
Yeah. I think, firstly, it's a infrastructure, it's a platform. So you really have to have a key differentiation for you to be able to compete, right? And that innovation needs to add substantial value, a 10x value, not a 1.5 or 2x value to what others are doing. Convincing developers to participate, being able to answer, do you have a grant that you can offer us? Or convincing investors why we are the next best thing,
and how you're adding value.
Yeah, exactly. Or talking to enterprise customers on why blockchains are better than databases, right? So it's never easy, but again, I guess that's why we do it because I very clearly see this is the future of our world, right? Where all the major transactions, important records are stored in a truth anchoring, permanence anchoring technology where any other technology doesn't provide that capability. And to make that future happen, you got to give it a go.
Well, that's well said. And just referring back to how you started the conversation, it anchors truth, right? That's why we are in this space. And from our side, we like to talk about the actual use cases with whether it's L1s, L2s, anything involving in terms of Web3 actually. Well, actually, L3s are also on the horizon, but just building and keeping calm and, like you said, anchoring truth. I really like that quote. Well, Roy, I think we've covered a substantial amount of information here. Thank you for leading us down the LightLink road. Just curious, why the name LightLink? Is there any significance to the name? There must be.
Yeah, thanks for your time in letting us tell our side of the story. And I think LightLink is a interesting name. It's a combination of many different things that we try to achieve. Link, connecting the world, and being a layer 2, right? That interoperability, that link to the larger economy is super important. And light being, it's a sign of positivity, it's energy, it's
truth.
It's truth, exactly. And connecting all of that together is what we're hoping to do.
Well, perfect. Roy, is there anything to add, or would you like to add from your side that maybe I have not asked, but you would like to let our audience know or take away?
Yeah, firstly, we can't do this without our team, right? So I'm not just representing myself, I'm a pretty terrible programmer. And it's our team that makes this happen, right? So we have great COO, a co-founder, Liv, our fantastic ecosystem lead, foundation lead, our key engineers, and people who dedicate their lives, 24/7 around the clock to make this happen. And it's their life, blood and tears that this technology is where it is today. And we want to change the world. So we can't do it alone, and we need more people to join us and help us along the way.
Perfect. What's the best way to follow your work or contact or participate?
Yeah, you can find us on Twitter. I'm sure we would post our Twitter handle in the show notes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you can definitely follow me on Roy Hui on X on Twitter as well.
Well, perfect. I think we're ready to wrap this up. Roy, thank you so very much for talking with me today and giving our audience a better understanding of LightLink and how it's different from other L2s and how, of course, it's similar for more of the less Web3 blockchain savvy, especially what use cases it aims to solve. And of course, a deeper dive into Roy Hui, the leader behind it all, and the team. So all the best to you and your team.
Thank you, Nina. It's definitely my pleasure for being here as well. And you definitely ask really challenging and interesting questions. And it's really good to hear from a lead podcast like yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again to our guests, and thank you everyone for listening. Thanks also to the Bariam Music team for providing their music. You can check them out on bariammusic.com. The episode supporting information is on our website, blockchainrecorded.com. Our podcast is available on Google, Apple, and Amazon Podcasts, as well as on YouTube, Spotify, and Radio Public. You can follow us on Twitter at Recorded Podcast and YouTube, where we are super grateful for your support. Stay tuned for our next episode.